Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist Podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland. I'm a licensed pharmacist and third-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. Most pharmacy students and professional graduates are aware of the possibility of going to medical school, but very few actually take the leap. We are here to unpack some of these details and open your eyes to the possibility of a career in both pharmacy and medicine. I'm very excited to have special guest Dr. Richard Harris on the show today. Dr. Harris is a board-certified internal medicine physician, pharmacist, professional speaker, investor, and host of the Strive for Great Health podcast. Dr. Harris is also an experienced life science consultant who has helped several pharmacy and medical startups navigate the healthcare market, especially from a holistic perspective. A true entrepreneur, Dr. Harris is the CMO of Nimbus Healthcare, medical director of Script Health, and co-founder of the 40 Acre Fund. Welcome to the show, Dr. Harris.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show, Nathan. And please call me Richard. We are definitely colleagues.
Absolutely. So I kind of covered a lot of information there. So you're obviously a very accomplished healthcare professional and business entrepreneur. And I think it's important to highlight that this long journey started with you getting your pharmacy degree from the University of Texas at Austin. What initially drew you into the world of pharmacy?
So it's pretty funny. I always say that my career path could only be designed by God because it's crazy. Like no one else would dream of this when they were a kid. I'm going to go do, what was it, like 15 years of school, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a lot of school. So in undergrad, I was always interested in math and science, and I went into UT being a physics major. I wanted to do biomedical physics and make prosthetics. Got to differential equations and was like, nope, I'm out. Let me go. Let me switch into my other love, which was biology. So I was really interested in biochemistry. I thought I wanted to do bench research. Did bench research on 2 years studying fetal alcohol syndrome and realized I can't do this for the rest of my life, spending time in a lab. And I was a junior. I was going to graduate the next year. I was freaking out, didn't know what I wanted to do. And the dean of the pharmacy school was whose lab I worked in. And he said, Richard, I think you make a good pharmacist. Why don't you apply to pharmacy school here? I said, okay, cool. Had no idea what a pharmacist did, knew nothing about pharmacy school, had never worked in a pharmacy, did my PCAT, had all the prereqs and applied and loved it. Absolutely loved what I was learning. Realized my first year in pharmacy school that I wanted to go to medical school. My dream as a kid was to be a doctor. I used to read books. Gifted Hands by Ben Carson was kind of the book that really got me interested in being a physician. I wanted to be a surgeon, but I have a benign tremor. So I realized that I would never be a surgeon. So that first year after pharmacy school, first year, I said, I'm going to go to medical school, but I'm 21. I'm in Austin. I'm having the time of my life. I love what I'm learning. So I'm going to finish this out. I've never quit anything in my life, and I'm not about to quit pharmacy school. So by the time I applied to medical school, my last year of pharmacy school, I had got early accepted into UTMB. I ended up going to UT Houston, but I knew I was in medical school before I even finished pharmacy school. I just delayed it a year because I wanted to work and know what it felt like to actually make money and not be broke, all throughout my 20s, right? So that was really the start of my journey into pharmacy school and then medical school.
Wow, that's fascinating. And I think it's so interesting that you jumped into pharmacy without having like any experience in the field, like prior to like working in retail. I know that's a common way that a lot of people take interest in the profession is working as a pharmacy technician, and then they kind of progress up to the intern level and then apply through to get into school and whatnot. So I think that's fascinating. It's also really interesting that you were interested in medical school since pretty much the first year of pharmacy school. For myself, I didn't have that epiphany until much later in the professional track. So I think that's fascinating that you had the wherewithal to finish out the whole program another 3 years after that first year. So kudos to you for doing that. And so it sounds like your whole track was spent on getting to medical school at that point, and you had that you were accepted before you even graduated pharmacy school. Was there ever a chance that you could have considered doing like a pharmacy residency during that one gap year in between?
I had thought about that, and it's not like it is now. Now you have all kinds of direct prescriptive authority, and I think that's going to expand for pharmacists. I think pharmacists are going to expand very heavily into wellness and preventative care and just your bread and butter primary care stuff, to where they can operate as a prescriber. But in 2008, when I graduated pharmacy school, that none of that was there. And so I thought about doing a residency, but what really bothered me was the fact that I could do all the stuff a prescriber could do in a hospital setting and maybe a clinic, but I wasn't allowed to do that same thing under my own authority. I had to be under someone else's authority. And that kind of bothered me. The other reason was, I remember when I came out, pharmacists were not getting a lot of respect in my rotations, and that angered me. And I said, I'm going to show all these physicians exactly what a pharmacist knows. And I remember my first year as an intern, usually attendings, how it is, they're watching the interns like a hawk. Mm-hmm. The upper levels are watching the interns like a hawk. I was running teams my first month. They were like, oh, you're the pharmacist? Okay, cool. Attending's been practicing for 10 years. What should we do about this? So I had that trust from day one, and I had this profound knowledge base on how you treated pretty much everything. And I learned how you diagnose things. And so I started off years ahead of my other colleagues. And I really began to mold my view on things when I was in residency, because I've always been more holistic. I've always been interested in exercise and nutrition. I love lifting weights. I did a powerlifting club in college and absolutely loved learning about all the things the body's capable of. And so once I got into residency, I started to really learn about the holistic side of things. And that escalated as soon as I got out of residency and started practicing on my own.
Wow, I love that. And the kind of building off of what you were saying with that, the medical background with pharmacy and having such a broad foundation, I definitely agree with that, in the sense that having this pharmacy background, medical schools don't even cover any of the second, third line options, and having that pharmacy background has helped substantially when it comes to optimizing medical care. Just so much of that I've seen on clinical rotations thus far. It's been very, very helpful. And I'm curious to know too, what was your opinion? Everyone always wants to ask me like, oh, how does medical school compare to pharmacy school? I'm curious to hear like what your take was and how they kind of compared with the rigor, content volume, something along those lines.
Yeah, I always tell people that pharmacy school was harder. And that's because, you've been through the first 2 years of medical school, the classroom portion. Mm-hmm. There's so much material that you're not going nearly as in depth as you do on certain subjects in pharmacy school, because we go into depth. I mean, pharmacokinetics is still the hardest class I've ever taken. It's harder than organic chemistry, harder than the physics classes I've taken, harder than some of these upper level math classes that I took. That mm-hmm. class is really hard. And so it prepared me so well for medical school that, number one, when I took pharmacology in medical school, I would finish like 100 question tests in like 5 minutes, because it was nowhere near the level of depth that we would go into. And then I actually worked as a first and second year medical student. I worked at MD Anderson, the place I worked at in that gap year. And I remember I got in trouble because it was frowned upon to work while you're in medical school. And I was like, well, I'm still making good grades. I'm happy. I have money to pay for stuff. Like, what's the problem? So, it was a very unique journey because of two reasons. Number one, I actually had work experience. Most of my classmates mm-hmm. who come in medical school have never worked a job before in their life. And then if they have, it's mainly, the typical college level job where you don't have responsibilities or very entry level stuff. And Absolutely. Then number two, I'd already been through grad school. I already knew what to expect. I already knew how I studied well, how much I needed to study. I already knew how professors at the grad school level thought. And so it was very easy for me to go through medical school because of the background that pharmacy school got me.
I love that too. Yeah, I've also worked actually the past 2 years of the didactic portion of medical school, and I agree entirely. just having that exposure to get back out into the pharmacy world, I think was refreshing in a sense, but also kind of kept me on my toes when it came to like professionalism and not falling into the, I guess, the mindset that, oh, I'm a student again, in the sense that I'm a licensed pharmacist and I'm able to practice at the full extent of my license. And I think it was just such a cool thing. On top of that, obviously making money certainly helps keep me off of the ramen diet, but I really enjoyed that experience and I'm glad that you did as well. And I kind of want to hear a little bit more too about the reason that you chose internal medicine as a profession.
Yeah, that if I had to do over again, I would change.
Interesting.
And the reason I chose internal medicine, because coming from pharmacy school is the path of least resistance. So, you've been through this. It's such a grind. And by the time I got done with 4th year of medical school, I was like, I just want the easiest path as possible to get me this MD, whatever's the easiest. I don't want to do like a 5-year residency. I don't want to do fellowship. I just want to be done. Because I only took a year off, right? That probably wasn't enough time off to really reset. And so I just went into what I already knew. And being a pharmacist, internal medicine is the easiest thing to go into, because what are you doing all day? You're mostly talking about medications, you're talking about biomarkers, and you're doing preventative care. Cool. I learned like 95% of that in pharmacy school. There's a high background I already had. And so if I had to do it over again, I would have gone into pathology. And
interesting.
I really love root cause medicine. And I have a friend who's a pathologist and an internal medicine physician, and she is awesome because she's like, yeah, I've looked at these organs under the microscope. I see what happens at the physiological level. I understand the biochemistry and all the root mechanisms. And then she takes that and she uses that information to be an amazing holistic practitioner. I'm like, that's so cool. Because at my root, I love mechanisms and I love learning about the biochemistry and then the applied biochemistry. And I think that if I had done that route, I probably would have been more okay being a full-time physician. I probably would have done some entrepreneurial stuff on the side, but I just didn't like where internal medicine was going and all of the administrative burden that you have on internal medicine. And that's when I said, after about a year and a half of doing it, I asked myself, Richard, could you do this when you were 60? And the answer was no, absolutely not. I can't see myself doing this when I'm 60. So how do I figure out what I actually want to do when I'm 60?
That's interesting too, that you mentioned that pathology. As a medical student, I kind of think of that role as only being, working in a laboratory, in the basement, something along those lines. But I think it's really cool that you can blend both the biochemical aspect as well as the clinical stuff where you're getting involved with patients and you're actually like working like hand in glove with patients. I think that's fascinating. And I didn't really know that was a possibility. So I'll have to keep that on my differential. And so you became an attending physician. Did you ever consider fellowships?
Briefly, I was really interested in critical care, mostly because I was good at it. I was very cool under pressure. I didn't freak out. I loved the ICU because I felt like you could actually make a difference. And I was also really interested in oncology just because of my work at MD Anderson. But I think oncology was another path of least resistance because I knew the cancer drugs so well because I worked in cancer pharmaceuticals for the longest time, right? For a couple of years. And so I hit a wall in my 2nd year of residency when I was getting together applications, trying to figure out which one I wanted to do. And I said, I can't do 3 more years of this. Just let me get done and then figure out what I want to do after that.
Right. Not to mention you could have potentially had to have moved to another location and all that other stuff that kind of goes along with fellowship. So I've definitely considered them as well, but I think it's something I'll have to reassess as I get closer and closer towards that finish line. I'm sure it gets harder to justify continuing on, but especially after doing pharmacy school, all these years of upper level graduate education, it definitely wears you down a little bit. But so after you had been practicing for a few years, I noticed that you also elected to get your Master's of Business Administration, so your MBA. And I'm curious to know what prompted you to further your educational pursuits along those lines. You mentioned that you wanted to be done. You couldn't see yourself practicing as a physician in internal medicine at 60 years old. So I guess was this that avenue that you considered?
Yeah. So one of the things my dad taught me, and this happened after he was laid off from his job. He was out of work for 8 months. It was really hard on him. And the position he was trying to get, he didn't have the right certificate and he didn't get it when he was younger. And he told me, he was like, never, or he said, don't get a certificate or an education or something because you think you might not need it in the future. He said, if you have an inkling that you might need it or that you want it, he said, put in the time, because you never know exactly what your future self is going to want to do. And that really stuck with me. And it's why so many times in my career, I've like had a conversation with future me and asked myself, will I be upset if I don't do this? Will I be mad at myself if I do this? And the MBA, I really wanted to change systems involved in medicine.
Hmm.
And I saw this area where you had people who are clinical not understand business and people who are business not understand clinical. And like, wait a minute, there's an opportunity here. And so I originally wanted to do healthcare administration. I wanted to work in a hospital system or a clinic system and be that bridge. And while I was in my MBA program, that's when I got the entrepreneurial bug. I hadn't really never thought about being an entrepreneur until that program. And that's when I launched the functional medicine clinic, moved it online about 8 months before COVID started. And then I was posting stuff online, trying to drum up business. And then I started getting people reaching out to me for consulting opportunities. I said, okay, let me do this. And so now I have 11 consulting clients and I do medical liaison work. So I'll talk to investors or other stakeholders about the company and about it from the medical perspective. I do content creation. I do business development. I also do talks. I work mostly with supplement and with health tech companies. I have media, so I have a podcast. I have online courses. I'm a professional speaker. I travel all around the country talking about holistic medicine. And that came out of the posts too that I would do online. People are like, hey, I like your stuff. Do you do speaking? Sure. So I started doing paid speaking. And then came the next thing I do. Because of the consulting, I would get offers or I would hear about startups looking for funding. And because I knew the pharmacy space very well, I knew the medical space very well, and I understood business, I could take a look at these opportunities and be like, hey, this actually solves a problem that I've identified. Not only that, I'm going to invest and I'm also going to advise for you because I understand this market. So I started doing that as well.
Wow.
And the final thing is telehealth. So when I moved my practice online, I had that for like 8 or 9 months. And then as these other things started to come up, I ramped down the practice. And then we had an opportunity to do something in the personalized medicine space for hair loss. And so me and my business partner, we started Nimbus Healthcare, and we're utilizing direct to consumer genetic tests with a compounding pharmacy to custom compound topical solutions for hair restoration. And so all of these things started to pop up just because I started exploring other opportunities and because I could see things like a pharmacist. My pharmacy license is still active. I can talk to other doctors. I understand how everything works being internal medicine. You know about every single piece of the healthcare system. And then I can analyze things from a business perspective as well. And so that combination is truly unique and allows me to do all the things I'm doing today. And so I'm really grateful that I put in all those years of hard work. I thank God for guiding me because now I get to do a little bit of a lot of different things. And it's really exciting to me.
Wow. Isn't it fascinating too how you slowly gain momentum and things just get easier and easier and more doors open as they go. It kind of snowballs to the point where you're like, wow, look at all these business ventures that I have. I think that's just fantastic. And you've obviously grown with every one of these businesses and learned new skills that you've utilized for, future businesses. So I love hearing all about that. I'm personally interested in getting my MBA as well, just to kind of broaden those perspectives, like you mentioned, and to, I guess, explore the business side of things. And I've definitely considered hospital administration kind of being that connection between some of the more business-minded individuals who may not have a medical background, who might be in charge of particular areas in the hospital, and kind of being that liaison to the healthcare professionals who lack that business education. So I think it's just such a cool role that you're living right now. So I envy you. um, I love talking about business as well. So what was like your initial, how did you, I guess, broach the idea, like where you sat down and said, I want to start a business, or I wanted to start, Nimbus Healthcare? How did that really come into effect?
It's kind of funny. Most of my businesses have been conversations. So Nimbus, my business partner and I, we started a company called Alpha Therapeutics, and we were having a conversation one day because we both did a lot in the hormone space. And people kept asking, hey, is there anything natural I could take? And we would say, yeah, there is, but you got to mix and match things. And we were having a conversation like, hey, we should just make our own. And I laughed about it. He laughed about it. And then like a couple of days later, I texted him, I was like, hey, man, I've been thinking about this. We should do it. He goes, I've been thinking about it too. Let's do it. So we started that. And so we'd already been working together on that when we got this other opportunity for this genetic hair loss thing. And so we said that there's a huge market here. We both understood personalized medicine. In my practice, I've been using nutrigenomics to customize supplement plans and also lifestyle plans for people based upon their genetics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I already understood that market. He's been in the compounding world for over a decade. And so we just saw an opportunity and we took it. It's the same thing with the consulting. I was just out there creating my own personal brand as a subject matter expert because I always liked speaking. And so I said, well, if I just put information out here and show that my information has value and that I can deliver it in a certain way, I'll probably pick up more speaking gigs. And initially, I didn't get any speaking gigs, but I got people reaching out to me saying, hey, it seems like you have this knowledge base and we're looking for that. Do you do consulting? And of course, the first person who asked, I was like, yeah, I do consulting. I have 0 consulting clients, 0 experience, right? And so I'm just making it up on the fly. But and then I began to niche down and be able to really offer legitimate services to my consulting clients. And so like most things in my life, when an opportunity has come my way, I'll evaluate it. And if I like it, even if I don't really know what I'm doing in that space, I'll just say yes and just kind of figure it out on the way.
That's such a great mentality too. I think it's just fascinating because you ask anyone and say, "Oh, I'm going to start a pharmaceutical company," and they'll just kind of laugh at you and say, "How are you even going to possibly do that?" And here you are on the other side of things, thinking, "How can I do this? Who do I need to find to make this happen? Do I need to go find the individual with all this compounding experience who can help facilitate the growth of this company?" And then taking it to new heights. I think it's fascinating that you're doing all that. And additionally, kind of latching onto the side of your business side of things, you mentioned that you have your own podcast, Strive for Great Health. Can you tell me a little bit more about what prompted you to create this media source and what do you typically discuss on the show?
Yeah, I guess that was my first business. Although I don't directly monetize my podcast, I indirectly monetize because I license out my content to my consulting clients. But the podcast started when I was first thinking about entrepreneurship. I started putting these videos out on Facebook because, you see it as a clinician. People ask you the same stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, how can I answer these questions in a way that I like? And it was like, okay, you can start a blog or you can just start posting videos. And I hate writing. So I was like, okay, let me just start doing these Facebook videos. And then eventually it got to the point where I get like 1,000 views per video. And I was like, well, I guess there's something here. If people are viewing my stuff 1,000 times, I guess they like what I'm saying. So I asked my Facebook audience at the time, I said, hey, if I started a podcast, would you guys listen? And like 120 people were like, yes, start the podcast. So if 120 people tell you to do something, you probably should do it, right? And
Absolutely.
so I was like, I didn't know anything about podcasting. So I was like, well, like you said, who do I know that can help me with this? And luckily I had a friend who was about to start a podcast. And she was like, hey, you need to talk to my friend Oziel. He's a podcast coach. So I said, cool. So I hired Oziel. He helped me craft my podcast branding and the mantra and the flow of my podcast, and really helped me diagram what I wanted to start with, which the first episodes are about the root causes of chronic disease, because I really wanted people to understand that number one, chronic disease is, a lot of them are preventable. Number two, that some of them can be reversed, or you can minimize the amount of medication you're on by your lifestyle habits. And so these are the things that I talk about. I talk about alternative treatments that are evidence-based. Like, for example, a study just came out a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was last week, that looked at mindfulness, a randomized controlled trial versus Lexapro, escitalopram. And it showed that the mindfulness intervention was not inferior to escitalopram. And that's amazing, right? Because say someone doesn't want to take medication. Okay, now I have something in my toolbox that is proven in a randomized controlled trial to be just as effective for anxiety. And so these are the things I talk about on, my social media and my podcast. I just really want people to know that there's other things they can do besides medication. And that also, you being a pharmacist, this, if you start looking at like the absolute risk reduction for a lot of these medications, people will be shocked at the numbers if they actually looked at what is your absolute risk reduction of taking, your blood pressure medication or your cholesterol medication or your diabetes medication. They'd be shocked. And so I wanted people to know that, hey, you cannot just depend on medication to fix you. It doesn't work like that. There's no medication that can overcome your habits and your lifestyle. And so these are the things I talk about in the podcast. It's been an incredible journey. It's been so much fun. I've had people all over the world reach out to me and tell me how much it's helped them or changed the way they think about their health or helped them get started on a health journey. And, that's really cool, because being an entrepreneur, it's like yourself, you start to think about, how do I scale, right? Being a doctor is not scalable. It just isn't. You have a max. You can only
There's a ceiling.
There's a ceiling. There's only so many patients you can take care of and provide high quality care. But if I put information out there, if I have a startup that's working on systems, if I'm helping health tech companies make healthcare better, that's infinitely scalable.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point right there. And I love how you mentioned too, with just talking about that study there. As a pharmacist, there's this common joke that they're the least compliant of all healthcare professionals. It's because we know what goes into these drugs and all the side effects associated with them. So if there are interventions that can minimize, overprescribing or polypharmacy, I think that's great that they're coming out with so many good studies about it. So I love hearing about that. And additionally, I'm kind of curious too, kind of blending the pharmacy and the physician role. We kind of talked about it briefly a few minutes ago, but the pharmacy profession tends to get a little bit of resistance, I think, from physicians sometimes when they're making recommendations. And I'm curious to see what your take is on how do we break down some of these walls between the professions and open up better lines of communication. Obviously, you're doing so through consulting. So I'm curious to see how can we do this on a broader scale, scaling it up to maybe a national level.
Yeah, I think that we have to break down these silos, right? And we know that the best outcomes, and this is data proven, is when you have a care team, and that a pharmacist is an integral part of a care team. And you've seen there are studies showing reduction in costs, reduction in adverse effects, increased compliance, right? Just better overall outcomes when you have a pharmacist involved. And physicians are prickly, and they really don't like listening to non-physicians. And this is not just a physician thing. I work a lot with law enforcement officers, and they don't like listening to people who aren't in law enforcement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes people like us who can bridge the gap, who can say, no, here's all the value that a pharmacist can bring. And I think you have to look at the way you're framing things. Nobody likes to be wrong, right? And if a pharmacist is calling you, you're wrong. You've done something wrong. But it's how you frame it and say, no, it's not that you did something wrong, even though you did. It's about, hey, I found this and I think it would be better for the patient and you get better outcomes if you did this. And here's why. And I like to have databases of things. So one of the things I did when I was a primary care, because I couldn't talk about all the lifestyle medicine stuff, was I had printouts. And so if you're seeing the same stuff over and over again, just keep quick references about studies that you can do. And so just send the study. Hey, I think this would get a better outcome for your patient. And here's a study behind it. Right. In that case, the physician, how are they going to say no in that situation? Right. You've presented them with a better outcome and hard data showing why you think there's going to be a better outcome. And then it's just collaboration and forming a bond, right? Knowing that physician, hey, what are you comfortable with? What do you like? What do you prescribe for this? You know, how do you treat this? Okay, cool. Like that's good that you're treating it like this, but have you looked at this data and have you looked at this from this approach? I think you could get better outcomes. And as we proliferate into pharmacogenetics and having a pharmacist on the team who's proficient in pharmacogenetics, that's just going to make things so much easier for everyone involved. Because as you know, how many times does someone get started on a medication and be like, oh, that didn't work. Let me try a different medication in the class.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that didn't work. Let me try a different medication in the class. It's like whack-a-mole. But having that pharmacist down in there who's proficient in pharmacogenetics can help you really take a better estimate of the first time that you work with that patient and getting it right. Because you can only get it wrong with somebody so many times before they just lose interest, right? Mm-hmm. And also having that pharmacist on board is going to help make sure that they're on the medications that they really need to be on. And I think that younger physicians are more open to this collaborative approach than older physicians, because older physicians grew up in a kill what you eat type of environment, to where other practitioners were your competition. Now, since most physicians are employed, you don't really look at it like that. It's not competition. Everybody's just trying to get the best outcome for that patient. And I'm really excited about the collaboration that we're going to see and that we're already seeing between physicians and pharmacists.
That's a great answer. And to follow up with that, so do you think then that the future of medicine as a whole kind of relies around this pharmacogenomic, I guess, like individualized, personalized medicine?
Absolutely. So, when you look at studies, right, a lot of physicians will look at randomized controlled trials like they're the Bible, they're gospel. And it's like, well, what this tells me is that for a person who looks like this in this situation, this is probably the best for a population level, right? Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily tell me what's going to be best for an individual. So when you look at personalized medicine, what you're doing is you're taking all the data from these population trials, and then you're looking at individual things and then estimating what's going to be the best outcome I can get for this person. Right. And so I truly believe that personalized medicine approach is the healthcare approach of the future, and it's team-based, it's collaborative. The team's going to have a exercise specialist to help the person exercise. They're going to have a health coach to help them navigate the mindset around lifestyle change. They're going to have a physician who's ordering lab work and diagnosing it and really coordinating the care plan. They're going to have a pharmacist who's optimizing medications and medication effects and preventing medication side effects. So that model is amazing, and it's going to have much better outcomes for people. And again, it's all about personalized medicine. I've seen what personalized medicine can do for people. I've seen the results it's been able to generate. And one of the reasons we started Nimbus was to use something that people have a lot of awareness of, which is hair loss, Most people think it's cosmetic, but if you look at the data, there's a huge psychosocial aspect to losing your hair. People get anxiety, they get depression, they get social isolation. There's a decrease in sexual performance, work performance. And then if you look at, androgenic alopecia, there's actually a lot of people who have inflammatory changes around the hair follicle, and it's actually an independent risk factor for like cardiovascular disease. So we took something that most people think is cosmetic, and we said, no, we can apply personalized medicine and lifestyle medicine to not only improve the psychosocial aspects around it, but they're also getting information about lifestyle medicine as well. And just kind of proving out this model that you can take this whole personalized medicine thing and scale it up and make it affordable.
That's amazing. Wow. You're inspiring me right now to start some pharmaceutical company. It's just just a great like perspective on how to kind of optimize care, taking what, like you said, seems like a very simplistic idea up front, and then backing it up with all this science and information that really has a lot of footing to it. I think it's just fascinating. And I'm curious to know too, where do you see yourself and I guess Nimbus Healthcare in the next 5 years? Where would you like to be?
I would love to be in all 50 states. I would love to be the introduction, maybe the first one, the first company or the first providers that people have heard of that are doing personalized medicine, and to grow people's curiosity into the effects of personalized medicine. And you're also seeing some other direct-to-consumer companies do this. I'm an advisor for a company called Routine. They do this in the multivitamin space, and it's coming. So hopefully we're working with other companies like this and really trying to push this personalized medicine front forward. And after that, we do well, that's on to the next project. It's on to the next thing.
Fantastic. Well, this has been amazing. I really appreciate you taking all this time to share all of your insight into not just business, but into healthcare and into pharmacy. I'm curious to know, do you have any last minute advice for pharmacists who are interested in pursuing a career in medicine or even just entrepreneurial business side of things?
Yeah, I think that most of us don't have enough conversations with ourselves, and we're not honest with ourselves. And we don't look ahead and say, what do I want 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What kind of person do I want? What kind of value can I add to the world? And I think the world's in a place right now. One of the main lessons I learned from COVID is that nothing's safe, and everyone should have something on the side that they can scale up if they need to. And there's so much that you can do with a pharmacy degree that's outside of what you typically think of a pharmacist, which is dispensing. So, keep your options open, keep your mind open. Don't be afraid of taking a leap. Don't be afraid of going part-time if you have to. There's still tons of part-time opportunities available. And then get with people who are where you want to be. One of the things I did was I started hanging out with a lot of entrepreneurs. I started connecting with, physician and pharmacist entrepreneurs on LinkedIn. I got in their circles. I started reading books about entrepreneurship, and I started reading books about scaling companies and all these other things. So it's like anything else. There's a process to it, but just don't be afraid to start if that's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, what's that famous saying? It's something along the lines of your personality is the average of the five people you spend the most time with. And I think that's like filling your circle with the right kind of people that are going to help you accomplish your goals and are also like-minded in the sense that you can also build and bounce off of each other. I think that's such an important point, whether you're in medical school, whether you're a pharmacist, or in just business itself. I think that's really, really important. Do you have any favorite business books that you could recommend to listeners that might have inspired you to kind of pursue the career that you have?
Oh man, there's so many. The best pure business book I've ever read is Ready, Fire, Aim by, I believe it's Michael Masterson is his name. All of Nassim Taleb's books changed the way I think. They completely changed the way I think. Those books are amazing. I love leadership books as well. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink is one of my favorite books. What else? Oh, if you've never read Basic Economics, that's a foundational book and just understanding overall economic drive. Those are some of the books that I would start with that have been very instrumental in my career. But if you're definitely trying to start a business or want to start a business, Ready Fire Aim is a phenomenal book.
I'm gonna have to check it out. I've heard of it before, but I haven't had the opportunity to read it yet. So I'll have to put it at the top of my reading list, on top of all the clinical studies and UWorld questions I have to do.
I don't envy you right now.
Oh, well, thank you so much again for taking the time to interview with me today. I'd like to also take this time to thank our listeners for all the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey, feel free to check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. Before we let you go, Dr. Harris or Richard, how can our listeners learn more about you or get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very active on Instagram at drharrismd, also on LinkedIn. You can just search for me. And then my podcast, Strive for Great Health Podcast, is available on all major podcast platforms. My website is theghwellness.com. That hosts all of my holistic stuff. So feel free to reach out to me if you're a student listening to this. I love talking to students and helping them, really guiding them towards what they might be interested in and expanding their mind on the realm of possibilities, because there's so much you could do in even a non-traditional route, outside of seeing patients, if that's the route that you want to go.
All righty. Well, and all those links will be posted below in the meeting notes. Thank you so much for being on the podcast again. I recognize you're an extremely busy individual with all of your entrepreneurial responsibilities. So again, thank you for your time and take care.
You as well.